Hello everyone and welcome to our webinar. I'm Carol and today we're going to talk about how to power up your game-based learning. And I'd like to introduce you to Charlotte, my colleague as well, who's going to be giving us some insights today.
Hi everyone, nice to meet you. So we're just going to keep our cameras on for a little bit and then we're going to jump off just so that we keep our bandwidth. But we just wanted to introduce ourselves. So I'm Charlotte Hills. I worked for many years in a neuroscience lab in Vancouver, and now I'm doing my PhD at Warwick University in the UK. It's all about psychology and kind of looking at what helps to make humans experts in different things. And I also do some work with the amazing Salva Studio, and I do some learning consultancy there. And I've designed many games over the years, so naturally I'm very excited about talking about gamification and what happens in the brain when we learn and when we play games.
Thanks, Charlotte. And I'm Carol. I'm head of learning at the amazing Salva Studio. And the little character on the right-hand side is Stella. And we're going to be talking a little bit about Stella when we give you some sort of memory techniques for thinking about powering up your game-based learning. So we're going to switch our cameras off now just to save bandwidth. But please chat with us in the chat window. We want to keep this as interactive as possible. And hopefully you'll enjoy it because we've got a nice little surprise game for you to play. So I'm just going to stop my video now. So I think the one thing that I wanted to start with is to just sort of say that sometimes game-based learning or game-based learning design is seen as a bit of a dark art, but I think that a lot of the skills that learning designers have are very similar. You know, historically we used to be quite didactic in our approach, but now we're a lot more action focused. We've really woken up to what creates the best engaging experiences, and I think the same applies to designing game-based learning, where we're actually focused on actions and personas and what motivates people. And when we're using games-based approaches for learning, we're just using a different mechanic.
So when we think about the word gamification, Carol's going to talk about, she's just talked about that already, but basically we're saying, don't worry about the terms. People tend to get quite hung up on the best way to talk about it. Carol, you're just on mute at the moment. I wonder if, can you see the unmute button?
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect.
Okay.
I can hear you now.
So, yeah, perfect. I hope you didn't miss too much. Okay, so yeah, as Charlotte said, we really don't want to get hung up about this word gamification. I think I did a webinar a couple of years ago, and every single speaker on that webinar had a different view on what gamification actually meant. So we're going to use that term today, but we might use other terms interchangeably too. So we're talking about the same thing. If we talk about game-based learning, if we're talking about gamification, we are essentially talking about the same thing, using a game-based approach to delivering a really compelling piece of learning. Okay, so apologies, there's a slight delay in moving my slide forward. So okay, so do you know what? I don't know if you guys out there play games, but we often start with a bit of an icebreaker in these sessions and ask people what their favorite game is. But the best way to learn game design is to actually play games. So as I said before, as I hinted before, we're going to actually get you to play a game. And I did this a while back. I realized I hadn't played many games. I went on this e-learning guild webinar, and one of the speakers talked about The Walking Dead, and I went along and had a go at it, and I realized actually it's essentially just a multiple choice quiz with a really compelling story, and it was that story that really compelled me to continue to play that game and the consequences of that played out in the game itself. So as the best way to learn about game design is to play games, let's play a game. Charlotte, over to you.
So the chat window has just been activated, so everyone can have a go at using that now. We wanted to get you guys to play a game called Whiplash. Has anyone played it before? So it's on the Nintendo Switch. There's lots of different PCs that offer it now, but it's a hilarious party game. And you basically have to come up with witty answers to questions like this one. Should be coming up on screen now. If you could write yes, if you've played the game before in the chat window, otherwise just write no, and we'll get a feeling of if this chat window is working for everyone. Yay, okay, brilliant. So I think it's working.
Oh, we've got quite about half and half so far.
Yeah, so a few people have given it a go before. So we will, actually, I'm just going to look at the Q&A, see if more people have replied in there. Oh, it's not working, chat's not working. So it's only working for panelists at the moment. Malaz, would you be able to look at that for us, please? So everyone, if you wouldn't mind heading over to Q&A, can you see there's a button at the bottom that says Q&A? If not, you can click the more button and then Q&A. Yeah, perfect. And you can write in there. So if everyone could give it a go and write down what their answer would be to this question, just for a bit of fun. We'll reveal what Carol and I have written. Carol, would you mind showing these guys our terrible answers to this question?
Of course.
Anita, loving your question and your answer. Jeff, you are a dark mind, just like me and Carol. So yeah, I said, help, I'm being held hostage. And Carol said, don't look behind you. So, wow, these are some great answers. As it was written, so it will come to pass. Stephanie, I like your thinking very much. Amazing. So if we could have 3 volunteers to play the game. Ashley Vest, would you mind being our number 1? And if you don't mind if I pick another one. Christy Howell, do you mind being our contestant number 2? And Deirdre, please could you be our contestant number 3? If you guys are up for it, we will get you to answer this question here. And if everyone else can hold off from answering, then we're going to vote on our favourite ones. So would you mind going back to, so if you could write your answer to this. So a new Muppets movie, the Muppets take blank. So you 3, what do the Muppets take? And then we're going to get everyone to vote on their favourite answer. Yes, okay, so Ashley said the Muppets take on Middle Earth.
Yeah.
Nice one. We'll just wait a couple more seconds for answers 2 and 3. If not, we'll open it up to you guys to come up with them. Okay, so if anyone else who's got a witty answer hiding in the back of their minds would share it with us, we'll pick a couple to vote against Ashley and see if anyone can beat her.
We've got Deirdre's response, actually. The
Is he
interwebs. Yeah. It's through the chat.
Oh, nice one. Okay.
The interwebs.
Oh, okay.
And Christy, very, very topical, said COVID.
Nice. Carol, would you mind opening the poll for us so people can?
Yes, of course.
So if your favourite was Ashley's one with the Muppets Take on Middle Earth, choose option number 1. If your favourite was Deirdre's with the interwebs, say option number 2. And if Christie's was your favourite with COVID, the Muppets Take on COVID, choose option number 3. So you should see that coming in your screen now.
Just waiting for some more votes to come in. Please
How's it
vote for
looking
your
so far,
favourite.
Carol?
It's pretty even. It's okay. It looks still voting.
So if you just look at the poll for question number 1, which
Okay.
Whiplash answer do you prefer?
I think we have a clear winner, which is option number 3, Charlotte. So,
So Christie's with the Muppets take on COVID is your winner. Nice one, Christy. So we play this in the learning design team quite a lot. It's a game that really connects you with your friends and colleagues. It can get a bit rowdy when you've had a few drinks and you're playing with your grandmother, in my case, and yeah, it can get a bit rude. But definitely recommend this as something to play to get different ideas for how you can pose kind of quiz questions. Amazing answers, really love those. So this has been a hugely successful game, and I wondered what game elements do you think were designed in to make it a fun and compelling game? It's made the people who made it quite a lot of money, Jackbox Games. If you could write your answers in the chat window. So Carol, how did you feel when you played the game?
Well, you know, when Charlotte first introduced me to this game, I hadn't actually played it before, and I actually felt quite panicky. You know, I actually felt a bit under pressure. My mind went a bit blank. You know, I thought, you know, I'm not going to look really good here if I don't come up with a really witty answer. So, yeah, it sort of got me a bit stirred up. But I would think after that, I really wanted to keep going. I wanted to have another try. I wanted to sort of prove myself, you know, prove that I could do it. So I really liked it. It's quite a social game, I think, and it's quite humorous. So I like that aspect of it as well. So yeah, no, it's really cool. It's great when you get the hang of it. I think Ashley mentioned earlier that he's played this a lot before. So I think if you've played it a few times, you know you're going to be, you know, pretty hot on coming up with a witty answer, not feeling that initial panic that I felt when I first played.
Nice, Carol. Are you able to see how people have responded? Okay, so we've got. Steve said, yeah, it involves participant response. Absolutely. So there's a social aspect to it. You're kind of interested to see what other participants have said. It requires a lot of focus, maybe because there's normally a time element to it. So we kind of left it a bit open today, but normally you only have 25 seconds. So it kind of keeps you on your toes.
Mm-hmm.
Any kind of other hooks that you guys can think of? Any other kind of elements that you think might have brought it to life? Yeah, humour, it's quite funny. Nice one, Anita. Yeah, I mean, Deirdre's hit a load of different aspects there. It involves competition, obviously, and there's a slight increase and a good increase in anxiety. So you'll find that a lot of games do that. It makes you feel something. And it's not necessarily... Yeah, it's not necessarily a positive emotion, but it definitely makes you feel something. And you have to think outside the box and get creative. Does that broadly align with what the different elements that you think should be designed into a game, Carol?
Yeah, I do think so. I mean, I think that the thing about this game is it's actually quite simple, and that's again something that I actually learned when, you know, I went on this webinar that I mentioned, that it's really important to keep it simple. But I think what we wanted to do was sort of think about, as learning designers, how we can bring, you know, key elements into game-based learning design that would really engage people. So there's certain things that if they're not there, it will feel a bit crass. So for example, you must have seen those games that have just got these amazing interfaces, but, you know, there's not a sense of gameplay at all. So I tried to sort of summarize with a mnemonic. Now, I mentioned to you earlier that little character that's appearing with us at the beginning, Stella. I'll introduce her now. She's a starfish, a 7-legged starfish, and she's a mnemonic to help us to remember the elements of gameplay. Now, I put this together really for the learning designers, and I share it now with a few people, but it's not like a rule set. It's not like a must-have list, but I think if you look at each of your game-based learning design productions and you consider each of these elements, then you're probably going to be, creating a reasonably compelling game. So I'm just going to go through Starfish, because I think that, to illustrate how we've used it in game-based learning design, it makes sense to show you a sort of deconstructed game-based learning solution. So we created a course for one of our clients on data privacy. And the idea of this game was, like any compliance piece of learning, is to ensure that people actually make the right decisions. But also, with like any compliance based learning pieces, you don't want to be spending a lot of time learning stuff that you may already know. So we had those two elements in mind when we put this together. So the scene set, the roles are cast, and there are characters in this game. So we have Agent Deason and Data Doom. And the idea is to prevent Data Doom from actually completing his mission, and that's to cause data privacy issues within the company. And there's actually quite a nice touch in this game where you have a bit of fun. So there's this running game where you run through the streets, you run through a cityscape, and you're trying to catch Data Doom. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on, because, for me, that was an interesting part of the game. So the story then, that's the first part of Starfish. So the S for Starfish stands for story. And the story we used in this case was overcoming the monster. So those of you who are interested in how stories are constructed, there's usually different story plots that you can pick on. So overcoming the monster is one. I mean, that's a bit like, for example, like War of the Worlds, or maybe James Bond or Star Wars, where you're sort of overcoming that monster, that protagonist, and you need to overcome in order to win. And then the other plots are things like Rags to Riches, The Quest. That's very popular actually in game-based learning design when you're on a bit of a mission to reach an end goal. Voyage and Return, Comedy, Tragedy, Rebirth. So I've listed them very quickly, but they're all things that you might consider when you're selecting a story for your game-based learning piece. Okay, so the next thing that we talk about in the mnemonic is the T and the A, which is for tokens and awards. So it's important to reward people and to give them, if you like, power-ups, and that's exactly what we did in this game. So the idea was that as people achieved something, like they answered a question right, or they looked at the case notes proactively, they were given power-ups that would help them in their gameplay, and that's the running game that I mentioned earlier. And the shield, for example, that if you win that allows you to take a bit of a hit when you hit an obstacle. It gives you another life, and then you've also got the power-ups such as the jetpack, which allows you to leap over the obstacles which might appear to be a bit too high to leap over. So all of it improves your gameplay. And there's also a time slow option as well to slow the time down, make it easier to navigate all those obstacles. In fact, the game actually does increase in speed as you go on until it's totally impossible not to hit an obstacle. So the more power-ups you get, the better you're going to do in the game. So then the R of Starfish, that's for rules. And I think we all know when we're playing a game what the rules are. I mentioned earlier, it's really important to keep it simple. If you don't keep it simple, people get put off. I mean, how many of those games can you remember trying to play where it just wasn't obvious how you played them? You took out the rules out of, maybe it was a boxed game, you took the rules out and gave up. I mean, I can remember a few of those examples where things were just too complex to even bother. So rules are explained right at the outset. You know what the consequences are for getting things wrong. You know what the rules are. You know how to achieve that challenge. And if you fail, you fail. So the next part of the mnemonic is feedback and failure. So it's really important that people know how they're doing throughout the game. So the interface should tell them that. If you run out of time, you're told that you've run out of time. If you've won a performance booster, you know you've won it. And you'll also, with learning, you'll get some feedback on how you're performing and whether you've answered questions correctly. So you'll get your guidance feedback. You always know where you stand. And F also stands for failure. Failure is an option in gameplay and game-based learning. So in this case, if you don't act fast enough, if you get a wrong answer, if you hit an obstacle, all of those things in this game have consequences, and that means game over. Next, we have the interface. So as I said earlier, it's not enough just to have a really nice looking interface that looks like a game. It needs to have the overall theme running through it. It needs to help tell the story. And the theme in this case was about chasing Data Doom and catching him before he created havoc. So that theme drove that interface. In fact, when you actually jump over the obstacles in this cityscape, those obstacles were, if you like, memory aids that were used in the learnings to give you prompts as to what you should be avoiding. So some of those pitfalls were represented in imagery used in the cityscape. So the Data Doom character runs through the streets. He's our hidden threat, and you have to uncover those hidden threats as you play the game. So he's being tackled, he's being chased, he's being stopped by the agent, and the learner is actually helping that agent to uncover any breaches or any potential breaches as they look at the different get questions and scenarios that play out. And in this case, the design is really clean and clear and simple. It works on multiple devices so that you can play it anywhere. And then we have the S of Starfish, which is about scoring. So in this case, scoring is based on two elements: getting the questions right. And in doing that, you unlock that mini game, that running game. And two, when you're in that mini game, the distance that you travel gives you a score. And the distance that you travel is the distance that you've been chasing Data Doom for. And interestingly, the client that we work with had a really good result with this running game because they chose to share those scores on Yammer. And in doing that, it went a bit viral, and more people then were attracted to the game and went in to have a look at it. And the other thing I would say, because when I played this game for the first time, I actually found myself replaying the game quite a few times, and in order to get to that running game, because I wanted to improve my score. And it occurred to me, actually, whether by design or by accident, this was a really, really good thing for learning, because I was repeating the learning a few times to actually get to that running game. So repetition is good for learning. It's going to help me remember if I go through it a few things. And then finally, the H, that's the hook. And this is really important in a game, because without the hook, it's probably almost the first question you need to be asking when you're designing a game. Do I want to play this again? Has this really hooked me in? Am I going to play it again to improve my score? Is it compelling enough? So I think for me that the hook in this game was the running game, because it was all about competing with peers to get the best score. So here's an idea, actually, and I might bring Charlotte in on this one. With regard to getting a bit of a hook, sometimes social sharing plays a key role in that. So Char, what would you say about sort of social hooks in learning and the importance of them?
Yeah, I mean, from a neuroscience, behavioral science perspective, the social side to anything is extremely important. So it's thought that the reasons our brains got so big so quickly was partly to facilitate our complex social relationships that we navigate. And we're constantly asking ourselves two questions. The first question is, how will this make me look? And the second question is, what are other people doing? And these two questions have the power to drive our behavior. So perhaps when you think about it, you might realize that one of these questions is why you're here today. And as we play games with other people, we're constantly rewarded with answers to these two compelling questions. And so if you do decide to add any kind of social layer to your gameplay, it can add a nice rich layer of engagement to the learning experience. And that's why, I guess from a neuroscience perspective, that it can be so compelling, it can be such a good hook.
I mean, feel free to to enter any good hooks that you can think of into the chat window, or maybe into the Q&A if the chat window is not working for you, but we'll be interested to hear some of your ideas. So I think also in looking at this sort of game design, you know, I've taken you through the starfish elements. If you can think of any more game elements that could be incorporated into the this game, and enter them into the chat window, you know, we'd love to hear your ideas too.
Nice. Okay. So I'm wondering, Carol, like, what is a game? So if you break it down, what is a game at the heart of it?
Yeah, exactly. So I think to answer that, I think I've picked on 4 things. I could probably say a lot more, but I think that I guess it includes, the first thing is instant gratification. I mentioned that earlier. You need to know how you're doing. You need to hear that feedback as you're moving through the game. It's expected. You know, if you text somebody and they don't respond, you know, you might get a little bit annoyed about that if you desperately want them to come back to you. It's the same mental thinking in the game. You need that instant gratification. It shouldn't be too hard. And then I think the next one is to include a discovery element. You know, allow people to find things out for themselves. You know, bearing in mind what I just said about not making it too hard, I think you can actually add layers of difficulty once people move through different levels, but finding things out for themselves, that element of surprise is really nice in a game. And then I think the third one is about failure and loss. And for every action in a game, there needs to be a consequence or consequences. In other words, in this case, failure. You know, when you design a game, quite often we think about how people are going to win, but actually turn that on its head. Think about how people are going to fail. Design games based on how you're going to get them to fail. And even on multiple levels, you know, you don't need to have just one failure point. There could be multiple failure points. And then the fourth one is about using extremism. You know, if you're going to design a game, go for it. You know, that's what we expect. Without extremism, it's probably not going to be a game. It's just going to be some sort of simulation. So extremism is an important consequence or something to design into your game-based learning. Okay, so I just went through those 4 points. So based on that list, what do you think we get the most pushback on? I'm just going to launch that poll again. It's the second poll, so I'm going to relaunch that. Poll number 2. So based on those 4, what do you think we get the most pushback on? So bearing in mind we're working with, you know, clients, you know, big corporates who, you know, rolling out game-based learning solutions. What do you think they feel most uncomfortable about out of those 4?
You can see that people are voting.
Yeah, excellent.
Ooh.
Oh, that's good. I'm going to share those results. Yeah.
Okay, people don't normally get this right.
Actually, I would say as a outstanding option that we get the most pushback on, and we would certainly agree with that. And yes, it is failure. You know, I think it's because we're talking about learning, aren't we? And it's a bit of a rub with learning. When you start talking about failure, you know, you get this sort of pushback around, oh, you know, we can't make it too difficult. We can't demotivate people. You know, we should probably make it easy for them. You know, why make it hard? It's about learning after all. But actually, wrong, because, you know, we're actually talking about game-based learning. So I think that what we would always say is that if people feel very uncomfortable about designing failure into the solution, then we probably shouldn't be creating a game-based learning solution at all. Games are not made that way. You know, you mustn't give people too much hand holding. People have got to figure it out for themselves, and that includes failing and learning through failure. That's so important. Okay. Okay, and there's a nice little cartoon. Hopefully that came across all right.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, so games are about failure. That was definitely a quote on that webinar that I talked about. you know, failure is about learning. So Charlotte, you know, this is an interesting point. You know, when we fail, is it good for helping us to learn stuff, or is it really bad? What's your take on that?
Well, to be honest, I think Ken Blank has put it best: success is a lousy teacher. So failure is so important in learning. So first off, failing can be quite an emotional experience. You know, you feel a failure quite strongly. And for that reason, the thing that you've learned from it can stay with you. You know, it can be a real wake-up call when you get something wrong, especially something which you thought you'd understood. You know, it can be quite a surprise. And failure is also part of an active learning experience, because if you're failing, it means that you're trying stuff. I mean, you guys already know this. I'm, you know, teaching you to suck eggs, but it's really important that don't make things too easy where people are going to get things 100% right. So, for example, maybe you're getting people to use their reasoning skills or their recall. You know, you're not just getting them to passively view content. That's really important. One of my favorite researchers, so she used to be at UBC in Vancouver, where I used to work. I do some work with UCL as well, but UBC in Vancouver. Her name is Lara Boyd. I don't know if there's a bit of a lag here. Yeah, perfect. So she's got an awesome TED Talk. It's definitely worth a watch. And it really simply talks about how after any learning experience, your brain will not be the same. And so we invited one of Lara's researchers, her name's Christina Rubino, and she came over to Saba to talk about some of Lara's work on neuroplasticity. So basically that's how the brain changes in response to learning. And Lara's work is particularly on how struggle and failure affects learning. So in one experiment, they scanned people's brains and then they got them to play a game. So in this game, they physically had to move their arm to catch a virtual asteroid, and then they had to throw it into the sun. And they did this catching and throwing motion thousands of times. And then they scanned people again afterwards. And so what they found was, in short, the more people struggled, the more they learnt. And the more they improved, and the more their brains changed. So it was quite a surprising finding, actually. Do you mind moving on one slide, Carol? So struggle and some degree of failure is good for you. So I find it quite helpful for me when I'm trying to learn things I really struggle with, like statistics. So remember that the next time you're feeling something's really challenging as you're trying to learn it. We also see people who are very tempted to make their learning and their exams too easy for learners, which is something we see a lot of. And it raises the question, you know, how hard should you make a game? What is the perfect amount of struggle? And this is something that's still up for debate, but there are a couple of pieces of advice I wanted to share with you. You guys might have heard Caroline Webb's talk. She was on just now, and she mentioned uncertainty. So when you're playing a game, or when you're designing a game, if you build chance into it, so like randomization, like, you know, you might get in a slot machine, or you allocate competitors to play against your players, it means that you're increasing the amount of uncertainty that is in the game. So if you do have this uncertainty or this element of chance, the rate at which you should allow people to get things right, or allow them to win, is about 50% of the time. So that is the most addictive rate of reward that we see in games that are a blend between chance and skill. So clients are often reluctant to build any chance into a learning game because they're very nervous about it not being completely fair. But if you do want to make the most addictive learning experience, you can build in uncertainty, you can build in chance. However, if you don't build any chance into a game and it's purely based on the skill of the learner, you want to aim to allow people to get questions right, or to allow them to make the right decisions about 80% of the time. And studies with both children learning maths and in online training programs that help rehabilitate stroke patients, and I used to work on those in Vancouver, 80% represents a great target for people to get things right. So if you're designing a kind of game or even an exam at the end of something, 80% seems to be a great kind of target. You might call this an achievable challenge. So according to a psychologist called Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, this keeps people in this sweet spot where they feel neither under-challenged or over-challenged. They're just at the right level of their skills. And this is where they learn best. So over to you to round up, Carol.
Thanks, Charlotte. So I thought I'd share this with you. So on the webinar that went on a couple of years ago, I quite like this mnemonic. I like mnemonics, you can probably guess that. And that's that GAME stands for Genuine Authentic Memory Enhancer. And, you know, I think that's what it's all about. You know, it helps you create memories. It's giving you those experiences. It's making you feel stuff, all the things that Charlotte talked about. And that was a nice mnemonic. So hopefully, I think that there's still quite an appetite for game-based learning, and it won't be game over for game-based learning. We're very happy to take questions. We have another 10 minutes, I believe. So please feel free to enter your questions into the chat window or use the Q&A panel. I think we've had a bit of trouble with the chat window. So let's try this out, and I'll hand back to you guys for questions.
Also to say that I can come to the Saba stand and we can have a chat using that functionality afterwards if people are interested. There's a nice little chat room that we can move over to.
Oh, thank you, William.
Thanks, William. Yeah, this session is recorded, Aaron. No worries. So I think if there are no particular questions, we should wrap up and perhaps there we go. We've got a couple. Yeah. Over to you, Carol.
Okay, I'll read the question out just in case anyone can't see it. So do you see a difference in responsiveness to learning games between more experienced, highly skilled personnel versus more entry-level personnel? If so, what are some approaches? I think this is an interesting one. I think we all like a bit of gameplay. And I think that, you know, I've one of my colleagues I used to work with was talking the other day on a webinar about the fact that she didn't like to see games used with compliance learning. But if you design the games so that you're actually giving people a shortcut to competence, so that they, you know, if they already have competence, that they can go through the challenge and do that, it's say in 10 minutes as opposed to half an hour, then the design's going to work and it's fun. And I think that you know, I think that there's a lot of very sort of pedestrian learning out there too, where, you know, you ask lots of questions and you're given sort of tokens and awards. But, you know, again, you really have to think carefully about how you design that game. And one of the things we often do, if you ask us to share some approaches, is we prototype. So that doesn't have to be a programmed prototype. It can be a paper prototype. So you might actually print out some examples of screens and you get people to play it, or you might use something like, I mean, PowerPoint even is quite a good prototyping tool. But I think it's really important to play it and test it out with the audience. It's really, I mean, to get it right for the individuals who are playing the game, it's important to have a good profile, a good persona profile for those going through it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and example. Sorry, Charlotte.
Just to talk to Marianne's question, I think one of the things that you might need to be aware of with more experienced personnel, especially with their level of seniority, is that you might not want to make it look like a game. For example, any kind of cartoon approach might really turn them off. It might seem to be too entry level or too babyish for them, but you still want to think about what the underlying mechanics are. So for example, is it something that you want to design just for that peer group? Do you want to use maybe more photorealism, more kind of scenario-based approaches rather than a kind of comic strip approach? But the only way you're going to know that is to reach out to your users. You know, it has to be very user-centered when you think about designing a game, regardless of the level of seniority. Thanks, Carol.
Yeah, and that actually leads nicely on to the next point, I think, Charlotte. Yes, I think obviously sort of serious games for senior managers, you know, you're quite often scenario based, you're in a simulated environment. I mean, I've actually seen quests where people solve challenges, but they are actually learning about sort of, managerial techniques and leadership techniques. So they're very compelling actually, because even though the learning is not so overt in that example, you're actually dealing with behaviors, and you're actually sort of giving people real-time feedback and watching how they interact. I think that's a really, really nice approach. I think examples of extremism, I think the example I showed was quite extreme in that we had a character who was basically on a mission to cause lots of data breaches within the organization. That's not real. That's just a fictional character. So I think it's okay to have that. And even with humor, we created a game on phishing, and the humor was quite extreme. It was fun. You basically were tempted to play around with the answers, maybe even select some of the answers that you probably knew weren't quite right, in order to see what the consequences were. But again, it's still a really good experience, that people were actually learning through that gameplay. So I think that was another nice example. Okay, I'm just reading the questions.
So Rich Rock says, do you have any experience integrating game-based learning into a curriculum or journey? I'm asking whether there's a framework or a way to think about the meta structure across a wider curriculum as opposed to just within a course.
Yeah, I think this question applies in a broader context. I think that we often think about journeys and a drawn out curriculum for some of our learning interventions. So for example, we use a lot of campaign-based learning. So the campaign might start with an awareness raising piece, and then it might actually start with some knowledge base or resources that will support learners. And then the game might fit into that journey that you mentioned there. So I think absolutely there's definitely a case for thinking about all learning in that way, around creating an appropriate set of learning assets to really, really augment that experience. We have 5 minutes more if anyone has any further questions or follow-up questions.
Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you so much for getting involved in our game that we had at the start. You were pretty hilarious. Sorry that the chat hasn't been so free-flowing. I think that's going to get better during the day. You've been brilliant. Glad you found it useful. For those who've commented, really appreciate your feedback. And we are happy to move over to the our virtual chat in our, what are we calling them? Our booth. So yeah, we'll be in the booth for a little bit if you did want to have a chat.
Thank you.
Take care, guys.